Hi, I'm Susan Alaimo from Columbia University. I'm the founder and director of SAT Smart. For the past 22 years, SAT Smart tutors, who are all Ivy League educated and earned a perfect or near perfect scores in all of the areas in which they tutor, have been helping students prepare for the SAT, ACT, AP courses, subject tests, and actually all high school subjects. What we do is work with students in 2-hour appointments to help them increase their attention span and work diligently on difficult subject matter. And we work with them on the actual material for which they are studying and preparing for exams. For example, on the SAT, we work with students with the official College Board SAT book. This book features 8 exams, several of which were actually given over the last 2 years. By working with students with the actual tests, they learn the exact type of material that's going to be on the test, the directions, and all of the strategies for the test. I also wrote a strategy guide. So each student who tutors with us for SAT prep gets an SAT strategy guide, teaching them the strategies for each section of the test so they can easily review it at any time. The reason our students increase their scores so incredibly is they go into the test confident because they've seen very similar questions to anything that's going to come up on the tests. The SAT exams are very repetitive from year to year. I proctored SAT exams for many years, saw every question that was on the test, and was always amazed at how repetitive the different tests were. When we work with students, for instance, we work with them section by section, identify their areas of weakness, teach them those strategies, and teach them similar questions to anything they get wrong in our sessions. For the first section of the SAT, for example, the topic is critical reading, and students get 5 passages, one of which is a double passage, followed by 10 to 11 critical reading questions. The type of questions that sometimes stumble students are the duo questions. They always have 1 or 2 sets in each story of duo questions, where the first question asks students a question about the passage, and the second question asks students in what line in the passage did they find their answer. So I teach students, for example, that if they don't know the answer to the first question, what they should do is read each of the 4 lines referenced in the second question and see which line answers the previous question. This gives them the answer to both questions. Another question that frequently stumbles students is vocabulary. They no longer have difficult vocabulary words on the SAT, but what they have are vocabulary in context questions. For example, on one question, the students had to find a word that basically means to leave. Their choices were evacuate, vacate, depart, and retire, okay? And I teach students that they all mean to leave, but they're used in very different contexts. When a hurricane is coming, you evacuate. At the end of your career, you retire. They're certainly not interchangeable. So by teaching students the strategies and how to identify these types of questions and answer them, they go into the test much more confident and are able to move quickly and confidently through the section. The second section of the SAT exam is language and writing. It's actually a grammar section. Here, students have to identify grammatical errors, punctuation, usage errors. There are 4 stories, each with 11 questions. By teaching students the rules of punctuation, many of which they haven't reviewed since elementary school, that automatically improves their score dramatically. Reminding them of the use of the semicolon, for instance. A semicolon is used when what comes before and what comes after the semicolon can each stand alone as a grammatically correct sentence. By reminding students of this fact alone, that increases their SAT score by at least 40 points. The third and fourth sections of the SAT are math. Section 3, they are not allowed to use their calculator, and Section 4, they are. Again, the same material is tested on each test over and over again. About 1/3 of the questions are algebra-based. It's called Heart of Algebra. Frequently, students are given 2 equations. To solve them, they invariably have to either add the 2 equations together or subtract one from the other. Frequently, they have to multiply both sides of the equation by a certain number so the variables cancel out. By practicing these, helps students incredibly. There's always one trig question on the SAT exam. The question is always the same. Students are given a right triangle, and they're told the sine of x, for instance, is 0.6, and asked, what's the cosine of y? I remind students that in a right triangle, the sine of x always equals the cosine of y. So if they tell you the sine of x is 0.6, the cosine of y is also 0.6. Sometimes they try to trick students, and they say in a right triangle, the sine of x is 0.6. What's the cosine of 90 minus x? Well, in a right triangle, x and y always add up to 90 degrees, so that's the exact same question. So whatever the sine of x is, the cosine of y is the same number as is the cosine of 90 minus x. I also teach students in math that the questions go in order from easy to hard. So they should start, obviously, with the first few easy questions, but work at the pace that works best for them. There's always a couple of very difficult questions, as College Board does not want anybody to get a perfect score. So what students should do, after doing the easier multiple choice questions, they should skip the last few hard multiple choice questions and move on to the last few questions, which are called open-ended questions. That's where students have to come up with their own answer and bubble it in. I teach students how to bubble in the answers. They give you a whole page of directions on the day of the test, but students don't want to waste 3, 4, 5 minutes learning the directions during the test. So I teach students, for example, if their answer is 1.5, they cannot bubble it in 1, 1/2, as a computer would read that as 11 halves. 1.5 has to be bubbled in as 1.5 or 3/2. Students catch on very quickly, but by going in knowing these directions, it helps them incredibly. Section 4, like I said, is also a math section. It's just a longer section, and students can use their calculator. I remind students that they are not allowed any scrap paper, but they're allowed to write all over their test booklet. The test booklet is not sacred, so they should write all over it. Particularly in math, solving problems, labeling diagrams, drawing pictures makes it much, much easier for them. The last section of the SAT is an optional essay. While College Board says it's optional, I always encourage students to write the essay at the end of the test, since there are many colleges that require it. I also teach them the format for the essay. And in the strategy guide that I give students, there are 4 pages in here that demonstrate for students exactly how they should write their essay. Students are given a passage. Typically, it's something factual. In a recent one, it was a foreword to a book by former US President Jimmy Carter on why the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge should be preserved. Students usually think that they have to write an essay agreeing or disagreeing with the author's point of view. And many students do this without even reading the directions. What I warn them of, the way they are graded on this essay, is they have to write an essay talking about how the author wrote a persuasive essay, not whether they agree or disagree. So I tell them that their first paragraph should always be that the author wrote a very persuasive essay, and they should state the techniques the author used, followed by a paragraph on each technique and a very solid conclusion. I go into detail on the best way to do this, as students are given 4 pages on which to write an essay over the course of 50 minutes. This is just an example of how we do it for SAT tutoring. Whether we're doing PSAT, ACT, AP exams, subject tests, we always work with students with the official test material, practice with them the material, identify their areas of weakness, teach them the way to address those type of questions, and give them a lot of practice in the areas in which they're weakest. Many students work with us on a weekly basis to help guide them through their coursework in school, helping them prepare for exams, teaching them anything that they may have struggled with during their lessons during the course of the day. So we work with students with absolutely any area of high school work. All of our expert tutors are highly trained in working with students, highly experienced, and really help students improve their scores incredibly. I hope to have the opportunity to work with your child, and please feel free to call us with any questions at all, or look at our website where you can see the bios of our tutors, testimonials from many, many previous students, and a lot of information about the tutoring service that we offer. Our website, www.satsmart.com. Thank you very much.